Gone with the Wind? Canceled. How defund the police quickly turns into socialism. A backstory has emerged between George Floyd and Officer Chauvin. Protesters claim control over a section of Seattle. Fauci tries to revive COVID fears. We got that and more coming up. Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everybody. Honor and a privilege to have a chance to chat with all of you across the country. And my, oh my, the cultural revolution, it seems, is underway, or at least some people are trying very hard to start it. They're doing everything that they can. We're at the early phases here. Rewrite our history, tear down statues, get rid of books, get rid of movies, get rid of TV shows. And I would just ask, where does all this stop? But really the more important question, I suppose, is where is it going? This is ultimately about power. This is about shifting the narrative. If you go back, if you go back to what we all learned in Poli-Sci 101, the origins of the nation state, or even I've been listening on tape to this book, Sapiens, which I should have known better than to get too deep into this one. I'm about halfway through it right now. It was highly recommended, according to its promotional materials, by Mark Zuckerberg, by former President Barack Obama. But I figured, all right, I'll check this out. And it's now just mostly how we explain humanity without the existence of God or a creator, the history of all humanity. There's some interesting stuff about evolution, but it's a lot of it is rather intuitive. But they keep taking you through these different versions of really our whole world is just a series of ideas. Right? Corporations are just an idea. Nations are just an idea. And it's one that we all have some buy-in. We understand that it exists, even though as a tangible thing, it does not. What was the difference, let's say, back in 1980, what was the difference between the United States and the Soviet Union? If you came from outer space and landed on the ground in the middle of the Soviet Union or the middle of America, well, they're both Earth, they're both territory, or you'd be walking around, there'd be trees, there'd be grass, or perhaps snow in the Soviet Union, whatever. But the difference would be that the individuals, the human beings that you come into contact with would have very different customs, perceptions, sense of rule of law, ways of acting, ways of approaching, ways of believing. Right? That would be the difference that you would, ways of communicating. These are the things that really are defining in our modern world. This is why we are different from the previous parts of our history, our earlier parts in our evolution, where we were just doing whatever we could to band together, kill a woolly mammoth and stay alive, right? Now we have these complex ideas, these things we buy into. And we also understand that ideas can mobilize millions of people in a way that person-to-person contact cannot. This is true of religions. This is true of political systems. And the book is an interesting enough, I suppose, exploration of those basic ideas, or those underlying, I should say, those foundational ideas. What we have right now, why am I bringing this up? What we have right now in this country is an effort in many ways to reshape some of the fundamental ideas about our society, to change our history in order to seize power in the present and to dictate our future. That is a large section of what you see happening right now. And that's why what started out as, look at this terrible incident of police violence against an unarmed black man, has now spiraled into not just riots and looting and massive protests during a pandemic, I might add. Everyone just forgot about the risks. That's what happened. Oh, no, it's okay now. Now you're allowed to do these things because you have a really good reason, they say. Well, now that we have seen this play out a bit more, we understand that the goals of the movement are much more widespread. Now we're seeing all of the demands that are coming out, and I'll get into what's going on in Seattle, for example, where they've seized a section. Protesters have, I don't know how much they could really claim to have seized it, but they say they have, and they're calling it an autonomous zone. But you see the demands coming out from the protesters, and it's really the Marxist left resurrected, or I should say the Marxist left emboldened. They now see this as an opportunity, and so they're going after everything right now. And that's why there's all this stuff that has to do with culture, not with police actions, not with even legislation. The cultural pressure to bend the knee, do what we say, obey the mob. And I would remind you, and it's a consistent theme that I've had now in the many years, going on a decade I've been doing this show. When you look at movements throughout history that have been truly transformative, it's the hardliners, it's the radicals, it's the true believers from within the ranks, who are usually not a majority, in many cases are just the loudest and most aggressive and most certain and most power-hungry minority within the movement. They end up in charge. Right? The history of the Soviet Union comes to mind right away. You had the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. You had all these different communist factions, the Democratic Socialists. Oh, that's right, like what Bernie Sanders says he is, right? There was a Democratic Socialist faction in the Soviet Union during the Civil War there as well. And there was all this fighting over power between them. But in the end, the true hardliners, Lenin and then Stalin, they were ascendant. So while people can always point to the more moderate elements within a mass movement, understand that it is often those who are most dedicated and most ruthless in their cause that end up making the decisions and becoming the movement. They tell the rest of the people involved and then everybody else that they seek to rule over, this is how it's going to be. Well, you should keep that in mind as we look at what's happening right now with the big one that's getting all the headlines is the HBO cancellation temporarily here. I guess it's on HBO Max. They're saying it's temporary until they can provide more context of the movie Gone with the Wind, which I think people consider one of the great classics of American cinema. Now, and producer Mark can make fun of me for this later because I'm in the middle of a serious monologue here, but this is true. I have never seen Gone with the Wind. I tried to watch it once with some friends in high school, and I fell asleep about 10 minutes into it. I have a basic idea of what it's about, but all I really need to know is that this movie has existed for decades and decades and been beloved, and I think it has sold more tickets still to this day because of re-releases than any other movie in American history. And it's the first movie ever for which an African-American actor received either an Oscar or an Oscar nomination, I forget which. And it's something that's just a part, it's a part of film canon. It's something that people know. Now, again, I haven't seen this one. I'm somebody, and I don't want to get diverted into this now because we have an important focus here on cancellation culture and how it's pernicious and destructive and only going to get worse. That's something I want to remind everybody of. This does not get better until people start saying, enough. I will not bend the knee. I will not apologize. Enough. But I do think that generally there's an elevating of older movies, and this is across all film in America, elevating of older movies as not just historically interesting or worthwhile, in their time and place, but as being better than they are. I'm just going to say it. I had a teacher, one of my greatest teachers of all time. He used to say, if the movie's black and white, it's got to be good. Nah, not true. not true, unfortunately. But here we have the cancellation by HBO of Gone with the Wind, which on its own you may say, okay, is this really... But you also have a Christopher Columbus statue that has been pulled down and dragged into a lake. The long-running reality TV show, decades long. I remember hanging out in my parents' room as a kid with my siblings, and once in a while my dad would be flipping through the channels, and we would watch the show Cops. And for whatever reason, there were a lot of people that were getting arrested that didn't have a shirt on. I just remember that. And there was some crazy stuff that you'd see on that show. And Cops has been around for decades. The show Cops has been pulled now. Elmer Fudd has had his, in the latest version of the Elmer Fudd Bugs Bunny cartoon, no longer has a gun. I don't know what he has. I don't know if he's walking around carrying a pair of binoculars or something, but that has been changed as well. And you look at, and this is not going to stop. This is not going to stop at all. They are emboldened. The left is emboldened right now. And you see this among fundamentalist religious and political movements all throughout history, that they attack elements of the culture and they get people to start saying, okay, I'll concede. And no one ever stops to ask, well, hold on a second. Why are you attacking this and not that? Why does this go but not the other thing? And what gives you this authority? And what are you going to do with it? What are you going to replace it with? It's a fair question to ask, isn't it? And why are we now judging certain things from history based on a 20, meaning whether it's, a piece of literature or, the morality of an individual then and how it affects their writings or how it. Now, look, I'm not saying that there should always be discussion about this. There should always be ongoing debate and who is this person? And that's all fine. That's all a part of the intellectual exchange and of the cultural diffusion and evolution that we're all going through constantly. But to say this is banned, to say decolonize your bookshelf, how far is that from book burning? And when are we allowed to push back and say, well, I'm sorry that there are some people who wrote books in the 20th century that you did not, now judging them in 2020, you don't think, or in the 19th century, the 18th century, to go back in time. But I'm sorry that judging them by today's standards, they are misogynists or they're not woke enough or whatever it may be. But I'm not going to allow the noisy true believers of the left to eradicate culture that they don't like today, or rather to eradicate cultural touchstones, and just because it serves their narrow political purposes. And why are they getting rid of the show Cops? It just shows cops doing what they do. Oh, it's a glorification of the police state? Well, isn't it also transparency? Shouldn't we have an awareness of what law enforcement officers are doing in our names day in and day out, the risks they take, the stresses on their families? I understand that it's spectacle. All TV is, of course, by its very nature, spectacle. But the removal of this, and look, I'm not sitting here crying big tears because Cops, the reality TV show, is no longer, but there's going to be more. I want to know when Law and Order is going to get pulled. Law and Order is a scripted fictional series, and if you watch enough Law and Order, you'll see there are a lot of college educated white 40-year-old males who live in very nice houses or live in fancy neighborhoods of Manhattan who fly into a rage and killed the maid for no reason. There's a lot of that in the show Law and Order. Just going to tell you. There are all kinds of efforts that are already made by these writers in Hollywood and these script writers of these various TV shows to, let's just say, be woke in more subtle ways. But it's not enough to be subtle. You have to absolutely bend the knee. You have to bend over backwards now. And I would want to know, on what basis do we stop? If it's really going to be anybody with a history of racism or misogyny or anyone involved in this slave trade at any point in history anywhere in the world, right? Because slavery of any human being is a deep wrong, and it's grotesquely immoral. Of course, slavery historically through societies all over the world until a couple hundred years ago was it was the norm. People often forget this. The Vikings owned slaves. The Romans owned slaves. The entire Muslim empire of the Ottoman world, all built on the backs of slaves. Of course, in the New World, African slaves brought here. I mean, you look at South America, African slaves brought there. But go throughout history, and conquest, and usually slavery as a part of that conquest, are the norm. So if we're really going to talk about history, what are we supposed to, how are we going to read anyone's books or look at anybody as, now I'm not saying you can't have this conversation, but to nullify or to destroy or to push aside and say, no, 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 we can't read this, or no, we can't talk about this. This is ignorance for the purposes of control. You should be able to read. You should be able to read the works of the worst people in history, like Karl Marx, for example. Responsible, his ideas going back to the conception of what a society is and how our agreements on things that are effectively fictions, right? A nation state, a law. These are not tangible things, but they affect so much of life. Karl Marx created the fiction of a worker's paradise of socialism that killed hundreds of millions of people in the 20th century. And if we're not careful, is going to kill hundreds of millions more in the 21st. Should we say that we can't learn anything about Marx? We can't read his... No, of course not. They celebrate him. There are still statues of Lenin in America, never mind in the Soviet Union. If we're going to talk about historical figures that can no longer not just be elevated, but even be discussed, I would just want to know, what do we do about different religious figures out there? You know, the good news is for Jesus, he's in good shape. There are some religious figures, though, some very well-known ones, that if you were to look into their past, you'd say, wow, that's not woke at all. That's not woke at all. There are religious figures, even major founders and people that are revered effectively as being divine themselves, who owned slaves, who murdered captives. And there are a whole lot of people named after some of these founders, too. So does that get brought into this discussion? Or no, that's not brought into the discussion. No, that can't be a part of it. Only certain things. See, the problem that you see unfolding before you is that there's only one cultural tradition that is under assault in this way, and it is the Judeo-Christian Western civilization tradition that is embodied here in America. That is under assault from the left right now, and somehow everything else or anything that doesn't fit into that framework escapes criticism. Why is that? To be woke is to be drunk with power because there are no outer limits to your ideology's willingness to destroy, to cancel, to nullify. So it's very enticing in that regard, but also understand this. There is really nothing in our culture. There is nothing that can survive the true application of wokeness. Eventually, it consumes itself. Eventually, all historical figures are imperfect. Eventually, there's nothing that you will be allowed to celebrate except what the people who are in charge of the wokeness in that moment deem acceptable.
Oh, it's nice to see some people change their mind. The head of the NFL said, yeah, maybe we was wrong. Football players, maybe they did have the right to peacefully protest. Well, don't apologize. Give Colin Kaepernick a job back.
Oh, okay. So somehow this is now transitioned into we need to start having financial amends made here, too. It's not just about police conduct and equality in dealing with the police. Remember, there is no racial discrimination enshrined in criminal law right now. If it existed, you would hear about it. It does not exist. What they're talking about is in the application of law. They claim there's systemic. The left claims there is systemic discrimination. And to look at that, they say that that's because of of disparity in arrests. Well, that forces the conversation. Well, is there a disparity in criminal conduct? Or are you suggesting, is the left suggesting that the disparity in minority arrests from with non-minorities on a per capita basis is a result of officers arresting innocent people en masse? I mean, millions and millions of people over time being arrested who are innocent and prosecuted and charged and then convicted and convicted in a court of law by a jury of their peers. Usually they take a guilty plea. Well, I want to know, what is really the contention then? And that's a fundamental question that no one really is allowed to ask or deal with. If we're looking at disproportionate numbers, is there also disproportionate violation of laws within given, whether we're talking about neighborhoods or cities or communities, whatever it may be? And what's going on there? And then you get into root causes of criminality, root causes of social dysfunction and breakdown. And that may be a very worthwhile conversation to have. But the only conversation we can have right now is the system is racist, and you better start giving stuff to people that are demanding stuff, or else. It transitioned from an appeal to our basic and underlying morality as human beings, seeing someone choked. I believe the person actually died. I believe George Floyd died of congestive heart failure, but it could have been brought on by being choked in this way and causing the racing pulse and all the rest of it. He didn't actually, I don't believe he asphyxiated to death. I think the coroner's report, by the way, just saying this, people, I'm just telling you what the coroner's report says, not what the family's coroner that investigated the body, but what the actual coroner's report says, and that is that he died from heart failure. And also, George Floyd had drugs in his system, and as we know also, anyway, there's a backstory that I'll be getting into shortly. But what does Colin Kaepernick have to do with any of this? What does Colin Kaepernick have to do with any of this? And I wonder when folks are going to start to look at that and say, hold on a second, Colin Kaepernick, in some ways the best thing that could happen is if they did put him back in the NFL, give him a starting job and let him throw, 4 interceptions a game and no touchdowns. And then people would say, well, of course, they'd say, well, it's because you took the job away from him for a few years. He lost his edge. No, the reality is the guy was on the decline of his career, and he pulled this move to become a social justice and, civil rights icon of sorts on the left now, and the Nike campaigns and all this stuff. He pulled all this as a resurrection of a career that was basically done. Huge benefit for him. No downside. No downside. In fact, now why have to deal with guys trying to tackle you and possibly getting injured and all that stuff when you can just be a hero for taking a knee? Now, I'll have you remember, while they try to claim that anyone who disagrees with them now doesn't understand, you're rejecting systemic racism, doesn't understand this stuff. And I mentioned this yesterday. It was actually back in 2016 that Ruth Bader Ginsburg said. So what I said yesterday in the show was true about the Supreme Court justice, but I forgot this was a few years back. Didn't say it right now. I think it's dumb and disrespectful, the Kaepernick protest during the flag. That's the left-wing icon, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG, the notorious, as they call her. She's like, this is dumb and disrespectful. It is dumb and disrespectful. Those of us that remember how this all started, the reason it got so much attention was that it was rooted in disrespect. And then once it got all the attention, they changed. They shifted away from, oh, well, this is saying that America's racist while we're trying to honor the American flag. This isn't that. This is about some other thing. This is about some other situation. You keep changing the debate topic every time they begin to lose the debate, just like with defund the police. We see this play out in other ways as well. And you have TV host on, what is it, The View? I mean, the dumbest show on television, The View. I mean, I honestly would rather get my politics from the cooking channel. And I don't mean a politics show on the cooking channel, just like whatever the random chef happens to throw in there. That would be more insightful than what I see on a regular basis on The View. But Sonny Hostin thinks that Colin Kaepernick, well, here, I'll let her say it for herself. Play clip 11, please.
And the question is Colin Kaepernick owed an apology? What do you think, Sonny?
Well, I think he's not only owed an apology, Whoopi. I think he's owed his job. I think he's owed back pay. And I think he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. I think what's fascinating about it is when you listen to Roger Goodell's mea culpa, He mentions everything. He says we were wrong. We should have listened. Athletes in the league are now allowed to take a knee. We support peaceful protest. He mentions every single thing except the very name of the man who started the protest.
Tell you this much. The NFL is really risking a lot here. We've gone now for many months without professional sports, and I've been saying it's a unifying force in America. But if it stops to be a unifying force, there's a lot of other methods and means of entertainment out there. And I'm telling you, if anyone wants to prove this wrong, all we have to do is see. Let's just see what happens to NFL viewership and game attendance. If this is such a good idea, if it's not disrespectful at all, you have players kneel. Kneel during the every national anthem. Just have a few players kneel every time and see what ends up happening. They want to be disrespectful. They can pay the price, pay the consequences, because we're allowed to say that that's disrespectful. See, this is the problem. People think that free speech in the First Amendment only applies to one side, the left, the woke, the Democrats. Let's not forget the Democrats are the party now of the authoritarian mob. Do what we say or else. And there's really no outer limit to what they're willing to demand. Stay in your home, lose your job, have no freedom, can't go to a funeral, can't gather together. Wear a stupid mask on your face. Wear a mask all the time. Why? Because they say so. You better or else. And they'll whip up the mob into a frenzy to be their enforcement arm. Until then, they have the mob for a different reason, these protests, and then all of a sudden COVID-19 isn't politically useful to them, and it ceases to be an issue. I am more furious about that bait and switch. I am more furious about what they've done with the COVID-19 lockdown and the lies that public health experts were telling about this, and why Dr. Fauci isn't standing up and screaming, "You're killing thousands and thousands of people, old people." Why isn't he there yelling that now as the protests are all over the country? No social distancing. If they don't need to social distance, then damn it, I don't need to social distance. But no, that's not the world we're living in. The world we're living in is whatever the left, socialist, social justice, identity politics mob wants and demands at any point in time. That's what we all have to adhere to. And it's very powerful. Corporate America, I feel like, I'm getting emails from companies that I bought, insoles from 10 years ago. The company that I once bought a packet of bubble gum from is sending me an email, "We stand with the protesters of Black Lives Matter." First of all, I don't care. But second of all, this is really concerning. Because the power that the left has to magnify its message, and that the depraved, cowardly mainstream media, no real ethics, no real... Look at the New York Times. Look at the cancellation there of Wrongthink. Getting rid of the op-ed editor. The guy was an absolute dyed-in-the-wool progressive. He's a left-winger. But he thought, I'm an op-ed editor, so sometimes we got to have opinions that show the other side. Nope. Canceled. See, this is the difference. This is what I mean with our history, with our literature, with our movies. It's not, here's why I don't like this thing that you are free to watch. It's no one is allowed to watch it. No one is allowed to read it. Deplatform it, bury it, punish anybody that asks any questions about it. That's a very different thing. That's a very different thing. And they continue to rewrite the aims of the movement and to try and just mobilize and get so much of a frenzy going that all of the distortions and all of the incongruities and irrational elements of the movement, such as they are, get swept aside. It doesn't matter. It's all about achieving what they're trying to achieve. And this is very Soviet. I've been somebody who for a long time has found it very instructive to understand the mentality of the left. You learn about the Soviet Union. Read the Gulag Archipelago. Read what it was like in this country for those who believed that they should be helping the Soviet Union because they were achieving paradise. Total equality for all people, with no one in need No one going hungry, everyone having a job, everyone having a home, everything provided by the state. Read Whittaker Chambers' witness and his conversion both to the cause of communism and then away from it. And the role of the American media and intelligentsia, particularly from the academy and from the government, in assisting communists while also assuring the public that there had been no penetrations of the United States government, which to this day is a lie. And Alger Hiss was, in fact, a communist agent. But here we are, once again, moving goalposts all over the place. And people are scared. People don't want to lose their jobs. And this is what I was saying about the corporate momentum here and how it's just so clearly the left boycotts. They've established that. You know how with a criminal cartel, they'll say, I can't, they'll order a hit on somebody. They'll order an assassination of somebody merely because they can't let it be out. You'll hear this in movies all the time. I can't have that disrespect. I can't believe that somebody, or I can't allow it to be believed that somebody would take a swing at us and we would not come back 10 times harder. Right? That's widespread. You know about this in cartels. You know about this from criminal activity. What you see right now is anyone who speaks out gets crushed, and the corporations, they know, they all have internalized that the left will mobilize against them with an action. The left will order the hit, so to speak, against the company. Conservatives don't do that. And so that means not only are we being silenced, but lunatic left-wingers can get, the most, they can get, Mercedes commercials and the fanciest cars and Starbucks and the most blue chip brands imaginable, just piling money toward their intellectual ineptitude and mediocrity over at MSNBC and CNN and all these places. They can be as woke as they want and get the biggest sponsors in the world. Meanwhile, anybody who's a conservative, who has an audience, who has real worth in the public sphere, has to worry every single day about them coming after you for trying to make the counter narrative, because you're a counter revolutionary in doing so. And they'll come after your sponsors, and they'll come after the people that want to partner with you because they want to serve products to your audience who are also Americans and human beings and allowed to have their opinions. Not in today's America. Corporations are decidedly on the left. Sponsors are overwhelmingly terrified of the boycotts that will come, not from somebody truly saying anything egregious or that we would all agree is wrong, just fighting back. And think of the ripple effect that has the message. Why has the left been able to take over Hollywood and the academy and journalism, college campuses, and now corporate boardrooms with all the diversity educators and diversity and inclusion mantra that is rammed down everybody's throats on the first day of their new job? You better not mess with the diversity educators. You better not mess with the HR department, folks, because, whoo, ruthless. They got powers like the Stasi in major corporations now. They'll just take you out, ruin your life, and nothing you can do about it. You better just clap and cheer when they talk about the latest diversity numbers and only let them talk about it. If you bring it up at your company or corporation, you might get fired. But we're told that these are the voices of the powerless all the time. No, that's not true. And increasingly, I'm seeing people unwilling to stand up and speak basic truths in the face of this insanity. And where does our country go from there? My friends, I can't tell you, but it's not good.
You're sitting now trying to figure out how you're going to stop the protest rather than how you're going to stop the brutality. You're calling your cabinet in trying to figure out how it's going to affect your vote rather than how it's going to affect our lives. You're scheming on how you can spin the story rather than you can achieve justice, wickedness in high places.
Wickedness in high places. Who do we think the Reverend Al, a decades-long con man and noted anti-Semite in his past, somehow always gets left off? you can be an anti-Semite if you're the Reverend Al and get TV shows and be invited to give the eulogy at a funeral like this. But, because the left makes up the rules as they go along as it increases their overall power. There's no standard. There's no morality. There's no ethics that cannot be bent, that cannot be abused, that cannot be cast aside. They do it all the time. But no one's trying to stop the protests. I mean, even in that one little soundbite, we're not trying to stop the protests. We're trying to stop the riots and the looting that the left and the Democrats, because that's who's behind this, keeps gaslighting us with, oh, it's not really happening. Yes, it is. It is really happening. I'm not going to relent on this. I'm not going to pretend that we haven't been through the nightmare that we have because of these lunatics, also known as Democrats.